Tell us a little bit about yourself. First of all, early years, where you grew up, and how ultimately you became interested in pursuing a career in law.
Well, Bob, I was born and raised in upstate New York. I'm from Herkimer. I was born in Little Falls. Went to West Canada Valley Central School. Both my parents were teachers. Upstate New York was just a wonderful place to grow up. I have fond memories. I still have many friends from that time. In terms of how I wanted to become a lawyer, that also stems from Herkimer County. My grandmother had actually been the first social worker in Herkimer County many, many years ago, and the only social worker. And I can remember her telling me about riding with the sheriffs off to investigate allegations of child abuse, sexual abuse, all different types of things, neglect. And I was so proud of her, and I said to her I wanted to be just like her. I wanted to become a social worker. And her response to me is, if you really want to help people, then what you should do is become a lawyer. And that was at a very young age. I decided I wanted to be a lawyer, and I wanted to be able to help protect women and children from violence.
And that's impressive that you received that sort of encouragement at a young age. And just the fact that somebody suggested that and you took it to heart.
I certainly did. In fact, when I went to college, I did an internship with the family court. I subsequently went to law school, was on law review, and wrote my law review article on the difficulties in prosecuting sexual offenses committed against children.
Tell me about the effort. I've talked with people over the years who've gone through law school, and it's challenging to say the least. I mean, not to say that getting an education for any profession can't be challenging, but it can be difficult. How difficult and how challenging did it turn out to be for you?
I'll be honest, my grades in law school were better than my grades in college, maybe high school, which is interesting, but effectively I had found my passion and loved to try cases, did very well in all my trial and my evidence, and also had a number of internships where actually in Ohio, once you're a third-year law student, you can try jury cases as well as represent juveniles, and I did both.
So tell me, after you got out of law school, about those early years, and as a young attorney, perhaps some of the lessons you learned from your first experiences with some of those cases.
Well, I wanted to be able to begin my trial preparation. So I accepted a position in Morris County, New Jersey with the criminal assignment judge, and I proceeded to have a one-year judicial clerkship, passed the bar exam, and was licensed in the state of New Jersey, and then went and started to interview with various prosecutors' office. And in Monmouth County, I was offered a position after the culmination of my internship, my judicial clerkship, and I became an assistant Monmouth County prosecutor, and I specialized in sex offenses, child abuse, rape cases.
Those are difficult cases. I mean, you have to be extremely sensitive, and you're hearing allegations about some of the potentially worst behavior that people experience.
I was 24 years of age, but I had, because of my grandmother, I had such a passion to help those victims, and I truly felt that, and we use the term victims, but quite frankly, I found that my role as a prosecutor was to turn those victims into survivors. And I think that the assistant district attorney plays a key role in assisting with that transition.
During those years and hearing some of the stories and sometimes having, of course, to come face to face with people who had been charged with heinous crimes, did it ever cause you to lose faith in humanity, or sometimes worry about what is wrong with people? I mean, to be blunt, sometimes people wonder how can anyone behave in such a manner. Did you ever become cynical about where things were as you worked to help those people who had been victims to become survivors?
Well, Bob, I've been a lawyer for 35 years in doing this work, and I still have the same passion I had at that time. But one of the things that I have the greatest appreciation for is the fact that I was able not only to work as a prosecutor for approximately 15 years, I was director of a sex crimes child abuse unit, but in addition I also worked as a public defender, a criminal defense attorney, so I saw it on the other perspective as well. Ultimately, I was also a judge for 10 years, with extensive experience in mental health, where I served and I sat as a judge conducting hearings at the Trenton Psychiatric Hospitals, which are the state hospitals in New Jersey, as well as a career involved with domestic violence, drug addiction. I was a member of the Board of Trustees for a program that was for homeless women with their children who are drug and alcohol addicted. So I've seen great successes as well with individuals who've had very, very difficult times fraught with abuse. And one of the things I did learn is that oftentimes abuse breeds abuse. And I think it's imperative that we need to identify those individuals as soon as possible, provide them with treatment and support to try to break that cycle.
So a case where, in some instances, abusive behavior goes on generation after generation.
Absolutely. Most of the women I've represented over the last year and a half, and I've represented quite a few in Monmouth County, were victims of abuse. Yes, they may have broken the law, but at the same point in time, they were also had been victimized since a young age. It's a pattern.
Speaking with Debra Gelson, Democratic candidate for Broome County Executive. So how long were you working there in Monmouth County?
Well, in Monmouth County, I was working as a district attorney. I was director of the Sex Crimes Child Abuse Unit 5 years. In addition, I was also a prosecutor in a number of municipalities for a total of about 15 years. After that, I was a judge, and I was also serving in 3 counties, Monmouth, Ocean, and Mercer County. And I would say out of 1,800 court sessions, over half were in the city of Trenton, where you were absolutely in the trenches there.
I would imagine in the city of Trenton, the system, the courts, the prosecutors were always extremely busy, very busy.
It was extremely busy. And you needed to do justice because you had very poor people that were there. We had a lot of cases. We had 3 sessions a day. Each session could be anywhere from 50 to 100 individuals. So it was very fast-paced, fast-moving, but that was a great experience.
So ultimately, what brought you to upstate New York?
Well, my children all left the nest, and I was recruited by my law firm, Tully Rinke, who is an upstate law firm. They originated in Albany. They have offices in Rochester, Syracuse, and Buffalo, as well as Binghamton. So they offered me a position with their firm, and I chose Binghamton, and I'm so happy I did. I love it here.
Was it just Binghamton at random, or was there something that you discovered about Binghamton that caused you to select this part of New York State?
Well, I'm a country girl. I grew up in small towns. I like the fact they're small towns. I was not really a city girl at all. So I was happy to come here, and it's also a little closer to my grandchildren who are in Pennsylvania.
So at what point did you get to considering running for the district attorney's position here in Broome County?
Well, Bob, when I first came, I applied with the courts to become an 18B attorney, which is essentially to handle cases that the public defender can't handle because of a conflict. So I've had over 50 felony cases between Broome County and Tioga. And having come from and observed many other criminal justice systems, I felt that there was a great deal of change that needed to be brought to ensure efficient, fair criminal justice. And I'm grateful to see the criminal justice reform coming, and I believe that having experienced criminal justice reform, I can certainly bring to the table and make sure that that's properly implemented through the district attorney's office. There were a number of concerning things, and I think that based upon my broad array of experience, that I can be fair and do justice, implement criminal justice reform, but be tough on violent crime.
How well do you know our current district attorney, Stephen Cornwell? Have you had many dealings with Mr. Cornwell since he became DA a little over 3 years ago?
Yes, I've had a chance to meet with him on one case, as well as Mr. Korchak.
And what's your assessment of the way the office currently is running? Mr. Cornwell made changes following the nearly 3 decades that Gerald Mullen had been the district attorney. Mr. Cornwell implemented changes in some procedures and the way the office is run. What's your assessment based on direct observation and also what you've heard with the operation of the DA's office now?
Well, with respect to the operation. I like the diversionary programs that Mr. Cornwall has implemented. I think that they're important, especially with regard to individuals who suffer from drug addictions, alcohol addiction, mental health, veterans, as well as, in many instances, even women who suffer from battered women syndrome, who I've represented a number who continue to engage in crimes because they do it at the behest of their significant other who has coerced them into doing it. At the same point in time, I do have a number of concerns that I think that cases need to be reviewed administratively early on. We need to be able to prosecute the cases that need to be prosecuted. We also need to review the cases where individuals should not be in jail, but for the system, I would like to implement a far more speedy administrative review and not cost the taxpayer approximately $75,000 a year per prisoner that's in the jail, where we could have alternatives where individuals' issues can be addressed, their cases can be addressed quickly, and that we reserve the resources for the cases that are most important to keeping this community safe in Broome County.
Our guest is Debra Gelson, Democratic candidate for Broome County District Attorney. Of course, at this time in New York State, major criminal justice reforms are occurring. A lot of moving parts, and that means Broome County and the other 61 counties across the state will have to make changes because of what's happening in Albany and what still likely will happen in the months ahead. What's your assessment about some of the criminal justice reforms that recently have been approved by the legislature and Governor Cuomo?
Well, I certainly agree with no cash bail with respect to misdemeanors. Misdemeanors rarely involve incarceration, so there's no need for us to be able to put individuals in jail pending a resolution of their matter. And quite frankly, we have a population that even a minimal amount of bail the individuals can't provide. What I've experienced with a number of the indigent individuals that I've represented is that, quite frankly, these individuals couldn't afford to leave. The purpose of bail is to ensure they're appearing in court. Even a minimal amount of bail could keep them in jail, which could ultimately result, and I've witnessed it, where families suffer. The individual loses job, the family suffer, the children suffer, and then again we're paying for additional resources for that family, and it comes back on the taxpayers. It's something that we need to make decisions on, that we can keep the resources where they belong and not increase them and waste them.
What about some of the changes that already are underway in the way young offenders are being treated? Changes already have occurred and more will come in terms of the treatment of 16, 17, 18-year-old offenders.
Well, that's something that I'm glad to see have happened too, because studies have proved that young individuals, particularly male, their frontal lobe has not fully developed, which results in they're having issues with impulse control. So I understand that that was the underlying reason for a lot of the for raising the age, and I completely agree with that. We have young individual that years ago, and I have a number of clients already that were 16 and sent to state prison. And unfortunately, that's going to be following them forever. And effectively, in many instances, it's ruined their opportunities and ruined their careers. We can't give up on our young people. We can't give up on our young people that are going down the path. They're easily led down that path. They lack the impulse control. But we also need to do that through community-based programs.
Some local law enforcement people have expressed concern about these changes because they have seen some very heinous crimes as a result of these very young offenders, sometimes things that you'd say, wait, somebody who is 14 or 15 or 16 is capable of doing that. And sadly, we've seen some very young people are indeed committing some atrocious crimes, and sometimes repeatedly. Some law enforcement officials have wondered if these changes then are going to too often give a pass to people, young people who have propensity for violence.
Well, we need to balance the individuals and the young youthful offenders with regard to their community and the safety of the community. And we've seen just recently violent offenses committed by teenagers. It seems to be on an uptick. Now, those individuals, if they're engaging in violent activity, they need to be brought off the street. The problem we're having is we don't have a juvenile facility. Our closest juvenile facility is in Westchester, and that's just not fair. Our young people that are going to be shipped to a locked facility going to be able to have their attorneys come out to represent them. So we need to have a juvenile facility. But certainly, I completely concur with law enforcement that young people who are engaging in violent acts need to be off the street if that's their propensity. Other than that, there needs to be some additional understanding that, yes, if you're going to engage in violent acts, that should be without tolerance.
So you're not interested in, as some people would describe it, coddling criminals?
No, just violent criminals. With respect to, you need to really look at each case on an individual basis. You need to look at the underlying impact. You need to look at the impact on society, the safety of society. I certainly, when it came to violent criminals, especially when I was prosecuting sex offenders, I by no means was coddling. I tried 17 jury trials in my last year that were all serious sex offenses, child sex offenses, and I won them all except one. And no, I don't think anyone would say that I coddled anyone at that time, and I wouldn't now.
The Republicans have yet to decide who the candidate will be. There will be a primary for Broome County Republicans on June 25th between Paul Battisti and Michael Korchak. What's your assessment of their campaign up to this point?
It's interesting. I would like to focus on the issues in my campaign, why I am the most qualified individual to become the district attorney, because of my vision, because of my experience, because of my integrity. And that's what I will focus on.
What is your sense that in some cases that other extraneous issues have been brought in to the campaign for the Republican nomination, whether it's criticism of the way the current district attorney's office has handled certain criminal cases, or things that don't involve the a district attorney's office at all. The fact that these other issues, certainly in the last few weeks, have taken the spotlight, whether in news coverage or in the campaign commercials.
Well, a lot of issues have been raised and allegations have been made. And to speak to those, I don't have, in terms of second-guessing decisions made by the district attorney's office. That's really not fair for me unless I knew all of the facts and circumstances on the decisions made. But with respect to other areas, especially as of late, I know that there's been a great deal that has been raised with regard to the issues of law enforcement involved with witnesses. My position would be that I would like a policy that law enforcement prohibit any involvement of any of their officers with witnesses, any type of a sexual relationship, anything along those lines. And for the purpose, because it maintains the integrity of the prosecution. It can be very easy, as a defense attorney, it can be very easily used to discredit an investigating officer, thereby putting an important case in peril. And ultimately, if we have to keep retrying cases, or if they have to be sent out to other counties or brought in special prosecutor, that's a huge expense to the taxpayer, but most importantly, to maintain the integrity of a given case.
What was your reaction to the acknowledgement by Fred Akshar that he had a sexual encounter with the mother of a murder victim in a case that he was involved in the investigation?
I was extremely disappointed, and quite frankly, I will make it a policy that any investigators or district attorneys in my office will not engage in any sexual and or social relationships with any individuals who could be potential witnesses in an investigation. And if they don't abide by that, then they will lose their positions.
As you've probably heard in the news accounts, that Senator Akshar has indicated that no laws were violated, essentially, despite his acknowledgement that his public position has been there was nothing wrong here.
Well, I disagree with Senator Akshar with regard to there may not have been any specific or direct laws of it, but essentially it's very poor judgment. The bottom line is that it could impact the prosecution of an individual who should be going to prison. It's just bad form, and it should not be engaged in. And a case is continuing through the appeal process. And until a case is finished, we should maintain as much protection of that individual case as we possibly can, because there's always a possibility that case is going to come back on appeal. I am truly disappointed in Senator Akshar's lack of judgment.
And the case has raised many questions about victims' rights and what victims, whether they're relatives or friends of somebody who was killed, what victims in Broome County can expect.
And if I were elected district attorney, I would promote an expansion of our victim advocates within our office to essentially support our victims, to provide any needed rehabilitation. As again, I became a district attorney in the beginning because I wanted to protect women and children who are most often victims in so many of the cases, and that's essentially what my platform on this campaign will be, is the protection of women and children from violent crimes.
Debra Gelson, Democratic candidate for Broome County District Attorney, I thank you for joining us.
I thank you. It's been a pleasure, Bob.